Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Caresoft on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Henry Sowell, the Chief Information Officer at Cloudera Government Solutions. Right before break, we're talking a lot about cybersecurity, so let's dive into there. With all this data, this idea of even streaming data, the idea of IoT devices, there's cyber threats, and cyber responses are more key than ever to protecting this data. Talk about what you're seeing when you talk to agencies and other customers about how they're trying to deal with this big challenge of security and of streaming data, IoT devices, and the like.
Yeah, so this is very similar. You see things on a continuum. One of the things that I see for organizations to help themselves, right? Sometimes it's starting with the basics, right? So there is a huge amount of data that is beneficial to understanding your cybersecurity posture. And so some of the first steps is just co-locating the various different data sources. This is, and what I mean by that is that we have data on edge devices. You're collecting things from routers, different network devices. You're pulling traffic from within your network, and having all these things dispersed, you sometimes have an issue when it comes to being able to understand a threat, right? So, hey, I believe I have an attack. Am I seeing this anywhere different in my network? Well, if I have to go to multiple different sources to try to find that answer, it actually makes my response time more difficult, and doing other different, more advanced analytics isn't even available to you. So what you want to do first is co-locate that data. And that is often a huge advancement and step forward for organizations and their cyber perspective, just to be able to understand what's happening on their network. But then you start advancing, right? So I can start doing analytics and understand what's normal activity, what is abnormal activity, implementing things like rule-based alerts to say, hey, this specific set of activity is occurring. I understand that is a threat, and that I need to either deny access, shut off access, or do some sort of other interdiction. And then it goes into more advanced data science work, where you can actually profile and look at what is your user's normal activity based on not just their regular network activity, but also based on their HR work and other pieces that you can say, hey, this specific user works from these times. This is the general machines they access. Here's what we need to do. But why are they, operating off hours from a different geolocation? And they're having, these pieces, and that starts doing a more advanced work so that you can actually prevent access and help understanding during an investigation what's going on. So there's a lot of different things that are happening, but data becomes a hugely core part of that. And then finding a solution that can co-locate that data, that can allow you to do major data science projects, and having some of that available at your fingertips is really important. So we're seeing people that are on many different parts of that journey. One of our Department of Defense customers is, in the start of that process, they have hundreds of different bases and locations where they're individually collecting network activity, but they're not holistically looking at that. So right now, their first process is, we're going to collect all of this data, and we're going to try to make sense of that from a central perspective, and have a better posture. And then we have others that are on even further, more advanced side, and other parts of the Department of Defense that are doing extremely advanced work to help prevent either some of these cybersecurity threats, and we have some customers that are actually using the lessons learned that they've taken and their advanced approaches, and are disseminating that to organizations throughout the country. So it's a really interesting field, and it requires a lot of skill, but it's important for every organization.
That's a great point, because we've seen the benefits of this co-location of data over the last year or two. Think of WannaCry, the virus that hit a lot of agencies hard, hit a lot of the rest of the world hard. But I'll tell you, the government really survived that fairly well. and in part because they have these tools in place that really focus on pulling data from different places to say, okay, that's a problem, or hey, that's only a little bit of a problem of our bigger agency network. So they were able to fix it before the attack really got into their agency in a bigger way. And I think that was probably the first time, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that I've seen that how this co-location of data is really helping agencies understand what's going on. The dashboard that they're using has really made a big difference. One of the things that I want to talk more about cybersecurity, and it falls in here because there's so much more data that's coming in because of what, as we mentioned earlier, IoT devices. So there's this idea of data streaming. Let's start with a definition of what you all mean by data streaming, because to me it means video teleconferencing, but it could be sensors that send data back every 30 seconds or every minute. So how do you guys define the concept of data streaming?
No, you're absolutely right. There are many different types of data streaming. It literally could be video that's being streamed, but it could be a network device that's putting out simple text logs every time a user accesses a specific server, and being able to take that data in real time or near real time and to be able to send it to another device that allows you to do an analysis on it. So data streaming can mean many different things. Oftentimes it's simply the transfer of some sort of data, whether it's video, images, text, and then taking it from one source and bringing it to another destination. And we see a lot of different solutions that are out there on this front. Some of those things are point solutions dealing with log-based data movement, or solutions for the movement of video or images. Having those introduce their own set of challenges, right? Like what we were describing earlier on in this conversation. But data streaming, extremely important. I think one of those things that you see is the ability to make advanced decisions in near real time, right? How do you start pushing things out to the edge? How do you start doing more advanced data science out on the edge? It's really interesting, but coming to that definition is the first step, right?
Yeah, I mean, because so many things come to mind when you think of data streaming. Unfortunately, we're all in this video world now, but it doesn't always have to be video. The other piece of this is the predictive analytics, the advanced analytics piece. Whether it's AI or machine learning or some other combination, that's really where the value people can get from co-locating their data and getting the information back in real time. Agencies are starting to move in that direction. So, but give me a sense of what maybe they're doing today and where maybe their biggest challenges are that they face when it comes to using more predictive analytics.
Yeah, so predictive analytics, it's been incredibly booming, right? So we saw some advanced folks that over the last 10 years that have been pushing the envelope, but we're actually seeing broader adoption on that front. Like many other data science topics, there's greater interest and there's actual production implementations. And you see those predictive analytics both in the data center, and now you're seeing them more prevalent at the edge as well. So one of the customers that I work closely with is using predictive analytics to do better condition-based maintenance on their aircraft, right? So imagine, where things were in the past. You have a helicopter or an airplane go in the air. The pilot would take it through many different maneuvers and would come back, and then you'd have a private on the ground, and they'd say, "Did you do X? Yes, no," and it'd be a paper checkbox to say whether they did activity, and that's what we would do a lot of our maintenance records on. But that's not leveraging data to actually make effective decisions. So now what they're doing is they're actually taking data recorded from while in flight, and when it comes back down, they're actually analyzing that based on the specifications from manufacturer to what can the parts take, right? And if they meet certain conditions, they know that, hey, they only have a month left for this particular bird to operate, and so what we need to do is we need to order the part now and have it delivered so that when the flight, when the bird needs to go in for maintenance, it's in maintenance for a week and not a month, right? And those things become hugely important for keeping our armed forces in the air longer. And you have little things like that. And then you have things that, and so, some of that is more data center based, but then you have things that are pushing analytics out to the edge. So, you see it in your home life. Those of you that have doorbells that can track and spot a specific face and tell you the name of that face, right? And who that person is. That's using analytics at the edge to tell you, in pushing those models and saying, hey, we believe that this is this person. And we're seeing that more from a government adoption as well, is that we don't always have the opportunity to take the data back before we make a decision at the edge. It's really interesting field.
I heard a very similar example before around aircraft analytics, very similar to one you mentioned, where if for instance, in tank or a Jeep or whatever, if it runs out of if a part usually runs out after X amount of miles, they can kind of plan for it, make better decisions, because instead of having to say, oh my God, we have to order the parts now, and the parts can take a month, they can know, okay, in a month, this part will run out, so they can get that order ahead of time. I think that's a really important value of data. And I think that actually leads us down the path to talk more about streaming. We've talked about our analytics and how agencies are capturing data in real time. But then you also have to parse and filter that data, make it worthwhile, and that's not necessarily always easy. And I think that goes back to the need to have some sort of data lake, again, co-location of data, as you said, and then you have to have tools on top of that. In many ways, that's really the nirvana for a lot of agencies.
Absolutely, right. One, being able to capture real time at the edge, and then being able to process that data where it needs to be processed, right? And so essentially thinking about it from, you need to be able to collect data at any source and bring it to any destination, and you need to have technology solutions that allow for that type of flexibility. At Cloudera, this is one area where I know I'm hugely passionate. I have seen missions directly impacted by this, where, from a legacy perspective, this is some of the most difficult work is onboarding new data sources, right? And when we say that data is so hugely important to our missions and what we're trying to accomplish, well, taking 6 months to develop code to bring on a new data source is just not acceptable anymore. Right? You need the flexibility to say that, hey, I have something like this COVID-19 right now, right? I have a customer that we worked with where they were actively collecting medical record data, and in that medical record data that they were collecting, they would go through a very manual process of having to log into servers, extract data, pull data over, and then they would go through a processing there in 4 or 5 steps, and then eventually would send it out so that it could start to be useful, right? And analyze that data. Well, you want to change one part of that, and it becomes arduous. And you have one pandemic that happens, and now you're in serious trouble, right? And so one of the things that what we did is we stepped in and said, okay, look, we have got to find a better way to be able to onboard data sources more quickly, to be changing to the current conditions that are on the ground. And this is a demand we're seeing across many different pieces. And this particular one, it went from processing something every 24 hours down to processing in real time so that researchers and doctors could make decisions right now. And that's where we have to remember that this is not just technology. This is mission. This is saving lives, right? And being able to do it well is hugely important.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. This has been a great conversation. So first, let me thank my guest. Henry Sowell is the Chief Information Officer at Cloudera Government Solutions. Henry, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the discussion, Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search innovation.